Dad skipped my life for my half-brother, so I gave him a choice, my graduation or goodbye. He chose. Not the way I expected, and not the way he expected either, because the choice he made created a consequence neither of us saw coming. My father walked out when I was 4. He moved 3 hours away. He married a woman named Kathleen, and they had a son named Bryce, my half-brother. Bryce is 2 years younger than me. He is the child my father chose to raise. Not in the theoretical sense, in the measurable, documented, hour-by-hour sense. My father attended every one of Bryce's basketball games, every parent-teacher conference, every birthday, every holiday, every school play, science fair, and field day. He was there. I know because Kathleen's Facebook is public, and the documentation of a father being present for one child is the most specific form of evidence of his absence from another. I saw my father 4 times a year, 2 weekends in summer, Thanksgiving, 1 day at Christmas. Each visit was short. Each visit felt like an appointment. The performance was convincing enough that relatives said, at least he shows up. At least. The participation trophy of parenting. My high school graduation was June 14th. I am the first person in my mother's family to attend a 4-year university, full scholarship, biomedical engineering. The acceptance letter is on my mother's refrigerator because my mother is the kind of woman who puts things on refrigerators because refrigerators are the altars of houses that can't afford anything else to celebrate with. I called my father in April. I said, graduation is June 14th. I need you there. He said, I'll be there. He said it with the confident delivery of a man who has been making promises for 18 years and breaking them with a consistency so reliable it could be calibrated. 2 weeks before graduation, he called. He said, there's a situation. Bryce has his baseball state championship on June 14th. I'm his coach. I didn't speak. He said, I know the timing is bad. I said, it's not timing. It's a choice. He said, I'm trying to be there for both of you. I said, you have never been there for both of us. You have been there for Bryce and you have visited me. Those are different verbs. You live Bryce's life, you attend mine. And now my graduation and his baseball game are on the same day, and you're going to show me which verb I get. He said, that's not fair. I said, here's what's fair. You choose my graduation or Bryce's game, and whichever one you don't choose, that's the goodbye. Not temporarily, permanently, because I have spent 14 years watching you be a full-time father 3 hours away and a part-time father in my living room, and I am done splitting the difference. He said, you can't ask me to choose between my children. I said, you chose between your children when I was 4. You've been choosing every day since. I'm just asking you to do it out loud for the first time. He called back 2 days later. He said, I'm going to the game. He chose, out loud, the word game instead of the word graduation. I said, okay. He said, I'll come see you the week after. I said, no, this was the choice. You made it. The week after doesn't exist. He said, you're being dramatic. I said, I'm being precise. You said game. I heard goodbye. The graduation was beautiful. My mother was in the second row. My grandmother drove 90 minutes. My mother's boyfriend, Carlos, who has been in my life for 3 years, and who I have resisted calling anything other than Carlos because the word dad is contaminated, was in the 5th row holding a sign that said, first in the family, in letters he had painted by hand because Carlos is a house painter, and painting letters on a poster board is the same skill as painting letters on a building. I walked across the stage. I held my diploma. I looked at the audience. The seat I had imagined my father in was empty. 3rd row, aisle. The seat I had told my mother to reserve because dad might come. She had put a jacket on it to hold it. The jacket was still there. Nobody sat in it. The empty seat with a jacket holding it was the most accurate portrait of my father's parenting I have ever seen. Present enough to reserve space. Absent enough that the space contained a jacket instead of a person. After the ceremony, I was in the parking lot. Then a car pulled into the lot. My father's car. He got out. He was wearing a baseball jersey. Bryce's team jersey. The ceremony was over. The stage was empty. The chairs were being folded. He walked toward me holding a bouquet of flowers he had bought at a gas station. The plastic wrap was still on. The price sticker said $9.99. He said, I made it. I said, no you didn't. You came. That's different. He held out the flowers. I didn't take them. I said, you're wearing Bryce's jersey. He looked down. He was wearing another boy's name on his chest at his daughter's graduation. He hadn't changed. He had driven 3 hours from a baseball diamond wearing his other child's uniform to a ceremony he had already missed. He said, Bryce won, state champions. I said, congratulations. He said, can we talk? I said, we talked. I gave you a choice. You chose. The flowers don't undo the jersey. Carlos walked over. He stood next to me. He didn't say anything. He held the sign. My father looked at Carlos. He looked at the sign. He said, who is he? I said, he's the person who was in the 5th row. My father got in his car. He drove away. But there is one thing Carlos said to me that night at dinner. He said, I painted that sign this morning, 2 hours. I used the leftover paint from the Miller job. I had blue and white. I wanted your school colors, but your school colors are red and gold, and I didn't have red and gold, so I used what I had. He said, your dad showed up in someone else's jersey. I showed up in the wrong colors. Neither of us got it exactly right, but I was in the 5th row with a blue and white sign, and he was in the parking lot with a gas station bouquet. And the difference between the 5th row and the parking lot is not distance. It's timing. I was there when it mattered. He was there when it was over. He said, I'm not trying to be your dad. I know the word is complicated for you, but the sign is going on the refrigerator next to the acceptance letter, because that's where important things go in this house. 3 days after graduation, Jose started calling. The first day once. The next day, twice. He left voicemails. The first one was light. Hey, just checking in, like it was any other Tuesday. The second was working harder. I think we both said things in the heat of the moment. The third was at midnight, his voice tight. You're punishing me and it's not fair. I drove 3 hours. I was there. I sat at the table the next morning and played all 3. I wasn't listening for something new. I was listening for something missing, and I found it. In all 3 voicemails, Jose never once said, I'm sorry. What he said was, I was there. And the difference between I'm sorry and I was there is the entire problem. I'm sorry means you know what you did. I was there means you're still arguing that you didn't do it. I told Jasmine about the voicemails. She listened with her arms crossed. When the third one ended, she said, he's not calling because he misses you. He's calling because he can't stand that you made him hear what he did out loud. You gave him a mirror and he's trying to give it back. She said, the second you pick up, he's going to turn this into a conversation about his feelings. And you already spent 18 years listening to his feelings. That's enough. Then a text came through from Bryce. Hey, Dad told me what happened. Can we talk? I hadn't spoken to Bryce in over a year. Our relationship has always been filtered through Jose, which means it barely exists. I didn't know if Bryce was reaching out because he actually wanted to talk to me or if Jose had put him up to it. The text sat unanswered for 2 days. At dinner, Thea noticed I was quiet. She said, "Your phone's been buzzing all week. Is it your father?" I said yes. She nodded. She said, "I spent 10 years hoping he'd change. Then I spent 4 years being angry he didn't. Then I spent the last 4 years just being tired. You're allowed to skip to tired if you want." I said I wasn't tired. I said I was clear. Thea said, "Clear is better than tired. Tired means you're still carrying it. Clear means you set it down." That night I responded to Bryce. "Did Dad ask you to text me?" He replied right away. "Yeah, but I also wanted to." The honesty surprised me. He could have lied, both things at once. I agreed to a phone call, not for Jose, for Bryce, because Bryce was the only person in Jose's house who had never personally wronged me. The call happened the next evening. I sat in my car in the driveway with the engine off. I called Bryce. His voice was young, the slight crack on certain words. I forget sometimes that Bryce is only 16. He said, "Dad's been weird since the game, like really quiet. He keeps driving places and not saying where." I asked him what Jose told him about graduation. There was a pause. Then Bryce said, "He said you were upset he couldn't make it. He said you'd come around." Of course, like I was a mood that would pass. I told Bryce the truth, all of it. I told it flat. The April call, the 2 weeks before call, the ultimatum, the graduation, the empty seat, the parking lot, the jersey, the gas station flowers. When I finished, Bryce was quiet. Then he said, "He was wearing my jersey?" I said yes. Bryce said, "He told me he changed before he left. He said he put on a nice shirt." I said, "He was wearing your number when he walked toward me with gas station flowers." Bryce went quiet again. Then he said something I did not expect. He said, "I didn't know he missed your graduation. He told me he went to both. He told me he saw you walk across the stage and then drove to my game. He said he made it work." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. This was a new room in the house of what Jose had done. He didn't just skip my graduation. He went home afterward and told Bryce he'd been to both. He took the parking lot at 7 p.m. and turned it into a story where he was in the audience at 4 p.m. I said, "He wasn't there, Bryce. The chairs were folded. The stage was empty. He missed everything." Bryce said, "Why would he lie about that?" I said, "Because if you knew he missed it, you'd know he chose your game. And if you knew that, you might start wondering what else he chose." The line was just breathing for a few seconds. Then Bryce said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." I said, "You don't have to be sorry. None of this is about you." Bryce said, "It kind of is though, because he's been telling me my whole life that he sees you all the time, that you guys are close." His voice got quieter. I believed him. Then Bryce said something I had never heard before. He said, "I asked Dad once why you don't come to our house. I was maybe 12. He said you were busy, that your mom keeps you busy. He made it sound like your mom was the reason." Everything in my body went tight. That sentence changed the shape of everything. Jose didn't just choose Bryce's life over mine. He put a name on the wall. He told a 12-year-old boy that the reason his half-sister never comes around is because her mother won't let her. And in doing that, he turned my mom into the villain of a story she didn't even know she was a character in. That's not just lying. That's building something. The call was winding down. Bryce said, "I want to talk to you again. Not because Dad asked, because I think I've been lied to about a lot, and you're the only person who'll tell me the truth." I said, "Okay." I sat in the car for 20 minutes after we hung up. I wasn't angry at Bryce. I was angry at the structure. The years of small lies stacked into big ones. Jose didn't just leave when I was 4. He spent the next 14 years building a version of events where leaving looked like something else. A week later, I came home from work, and Jose's car was in the driveway. Jose was standing on the porch. Thea was in the doorway with her arms crossed. I sat in the car for a full minute. I got out. I walked toward the porch. Jose's whole face changed. He smiled. He said, "There she is," like I'd been hiding. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "What are you doing here?" Jose said, "I came to talk. You won't return my calls." I drove 3 hours. I said, "You drove 3 hours to my graduation too. You were late to that also." Thea said, "She is my daughter. She's been my daughter every single day for 14 years. You don't get to walk onto my porch and tell me what's between you and her when you weren't between anything. You were 3 hours away coaching someone else's batting stance." Jose turned back to me. He said, "I've been thinking a lot, and I know I made a mistake. I should have been at the graduation. I know that now." I said, "You knew it then. I told you what would happen. You chose anyway." Jose said, "You gave me an impossible choice." I said, "No, I gave you a clear one. You just didn't like the terms." He shifted. The "I made a mistake" angle wasn't working, so he pulled out a different tool. He said, "I talked to Bryce. He told me about your call. He's confused now. He's asking questions I don't know how to answer." The pivot. He wasn't bringing up Bryce because he cared about Bryce's confusion. He was bringing up Bryce because he wanted me to feel guilty for causing it. I said, "Try the truth. That works." Jose said, "You told a 16-year-old that his father is a liar." I said, "No, I told a 16-year-old the truth. You're the one who made the truth sound like a lie by lying about it first." He said, "So that's it? 18 years as your father and one bad choice and I'm done?" I stepped right up to the bottom of those porch steps. I said, "It wasn't one bad choice. It was one honest choice. Every other time you picked Bryce, you did it quietly. You just didn't show up and let me fill in the blanks. But this time I made you say it out loud. I made you choose in daylight, and you picked the same thing you've always picked. The only difference is this time I was listening." Jose said, "I'm not leaving until we figure this out." I said, "Then you'll be standing on my mother's porch for a very long time, because there's nothing to figure out. The math is done." Then I heard the engine. Carlos's truck turned into the driveway. He cut the engine and got out, wearing his work clothes. White shirt with blue and gray paint spots on it. He came and stood next to me, close enough that I could smell the paint on his clothes. Jose said, "This doesn't involve you." Carlos didn't react. He just stood there in his paint-covered shirt and he said, "I painted a sign for her graduation. I sat in the 5th row. I clapped when she walked across the stage. I ate dinner with her that night. I put the sign on the fridge." He paused. Then he said, "It involves me." Jose looked at the 3 of us. Thea in the doorway, me on the walkway, Carlos beside me. He was outnumbered, but not the way you get outnumbered in a fight. It was about presence, about the accumulated hours. He walked down the porch steps, past me, past Carlos, across the driveway, and got in his car. He backed out and drove away. I knew this wasn't over. Jose doesn't lose like this. He rewrites. 2 weeks went by. Then Yasmin called. "Have you seen Kathleen's Facebook?" She sent a screenshot, a photo of Jose at Bryce's championship. The caption, "So proud of our state champion and his amazing dad who somehow made it to both his son's game and his daughter's graduation on the same day." Super dad doesn't even cover it. Jose didn't just lie to Bryce. He gave Kathleen the same lie, and Kathleen put it on the internet. I called Bryce. "Have you seen your mom's post?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You know it's not true." He was quiet. Then he said, "I know. That's why I wanted to call you. Because I've been thinking about what you said about the jersey and the parking lot, and I went back and looked at mom's Facebook. All the posts. Every game, every birthday, every holiday. You're not in any of them. Not one photo, not one mention. 14 years of posts, and you don't exist in any of them." His voice cracked. "It's like he has one family online and I never knew there was another one." He said, "I'm going to talk to him tonight." Bryce called back the next morning. His voice had aged overnight. He said, "I asked him." I said, "What happened?" Bryce said, "At first he did the usual thing. He said I was overthinking it. So I pulled up mom's Facebook on my phone. I showed him the post. I said, 'Did you see her walk across the stage?' He said yes. I said, 'What color was her gown?' He didn't answer." Bryce paused. He didn't know what color the gown was because he wasn't there, and he knew that I knew. I watched his face change. It was like watching someone get caught in a lie they've been telling so long they almost believed it themselves. Bryce said Jose finally said, "I messed up. Not just the graduation. All of it. I told myself I was handling both, but I wasn't. I was handling one and visiting the other, and I told myself visiting was enough." Bryce said, and then he said something that really got me. He said, "I chose the life that was easier to live in. Your mom, this house, your games, it was all right here. Your sister was 3 hours away, and every time I drove there, I had to see what I wasn't doing. So I stopped driving as much, and then I stopped feeling bad about not driving, and then I convinced myself the distance was the problem, not me." Bryce's voice went thin. He admitted it, but he only admitted it to me, not to you. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, "He doesn't have to say it to me. I already knew. I've known since I was 8, and he forgot my birthday and sent a card 3 weeks late with the wrong age on it. I don't need his confession, Bryce. I needed his choice, and he made it." Bryce said, "He wants to call you." I said, "I know he does, but a phone call is just another visit, another allocated hour of performance." I told him what goodbye meant. Bryce said, "What if I want to keep talking to you? Not for him, for me." I said, "Then we keep talking. You're my brother. He doesn't own that." Right before we hung up, he said, "Your gown was red and gold, by the way. I looked up your school's colors." I closed my eyes. My 16-year-old half-brother looked up my school colors. My 44-year-old father didn't know them. That evening I came home and Carlos was at the table. The sign was still on the refrigerator next to the acceptance letter. Blue and white letters on poster board. The wrong colors for my school. The right colors for a man who used what he had. Carlos saw me looking at it. He said, "You okay?" I said, "Bryce looked up my school colors." Carlos nodded. He said, "Good kid." I sat down. I looked at the sign. I looked at the acceptance letter. I said, "Carlos?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "The sign stays on the fridge." He smiled. He said, "It's not going anywhere." I said, "Neither are you." It wasn't the word dad. I wasn't ready for that word yet. Maybe I never would be. But it was close. It was closer than a parking lot at 7 p.m. It was closer than a jersey with someone else's name. It was a blue and white sign in the wrong colors on a refrigerator in a house where the people inside it chose to be there. And that was enough. That was the whole thing.